Welcome to By George, an 80 Players podcast here at the George Theater. I am your host and marketing associate, Miranda Zabst, and today I have with me
Rabbi Adrian Scott from Congregation Beth Israel in Houston, who and I have been working as a consultant on the production of Fiddler on the Roof with 80 Players.
I am so happy to have you here today. I want to get to know everything about you, and I want to get to know about what you've been doing for Fiddler on the Roof. This is one of our biggest shows. I don't know if you've heard, but we're already selling out a lot of our houses. And so for us, musicals have always kind of been a hit or miss. We do these really big productions and then we don't always get those audience members in, but that is turning with Fiddler on the Roof. So if you want to come see Fiddler, get your tickets soon. They are going very fast. And I know people say they go fast and they're not really. They are going fast. Mm-hmm. I think our opening weekend is already sold out.
It's wonderful.
So first, I want to know a little bit about your history. So I researched a little bit, but I want to know what it is that you do and what led you to this point to becoming a rabbi.
Well, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. I grew up in the Midwest primarily and grew up in a Reform Jewish household, which Reform Judaism is a liberal branch of Judaism that celebrates progressive ideals and combining ancient traditions with modern society, and grew up in a home that was very focused on Jewish values and Jewish observance. And we were also very involved in our local Reform synagogue. And during high school, I was very involved in music. I played in our area local youth symphony and did a lot of singing, and realized that if I would pursue some kind of professional life within the Jewish community, I could combine a lot of those passions. And after I went to Israel for the very first time when I was 15, I came back and I was sold and committed to becoming a rabbi. I made a firm decision at 15 and stuck with it during college, and then ultimately attended a liberal rabbinical seminary, Hebrew Union College, which has different branches for 5 years after undergrad. And I became a rabbi 20 years ago, actually, this month.
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
Thank you. And I started working here at Congregation Beth Israel in 2005. Wow. So along the way, I did a lot of different what we call student rabbi positions. So I worked and served in smaller communities with very small, somewhat dying communities, where I gained a lot of practical experience of leading different things. My studies also included studying a bit of the music and the history of music. Also spending time working in hospitals as a chaplain. That's a very pastoral care is a very important part of what I do. And teaching, of course, teaching kids, teaching adults, and also doing a lot of life cycle events from the happiest moments from birth also till death. So I have a lot of, my day can change by the hour. I don't always, I have a schedule. Sometimes I get to do all those things. Sometimes I don't. So there are, it's very busy. The congregation where I work is about 1,600 families.
Wow.
So it's a very big community and requires a lot of attention.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
How did people around you take the fact that you wanted to become a rabbi so early in life at 15?
They were very supportive. They were very, very supportive. My parents were very supportive and believed fully that it would be a great path for me and had no doubts. And I spent a lot of time in Jewish summer camps, spending time in the cemetery during high school and in college, attending weekend workshops, and got to know, as well as you can know from the outside, about the process, and getting to know a lot of rabbinical students at the time. And I knew that diversity is something that we celebrate and appreciate in our denomination. Women in my faith have been rabbis since 1972. So I wasn't too concerned about a gender barrier, and was very grateful that I was accepted and everything was set.
That was the next thing that I was going to ask, was being a female, being a woman, and going into such a position. What do you know that the history behind that decision?
Absolutely. It's a very long history, actually. And while the first female Reform rabbi was ordained officially in 1972, there are records dating back to 18th century in Germany that women were functioning in the role as rabbis while their males in the community were serving in the army or busy with other obligations.
I see.
And so it's sort of a long trajectory. It wasn't always so favorable. The woman, what we consider our first female rabbi, our leader, our pioneer, was actually rejected the first time she applied and was encouraged to become an educator, a teacher, which is very common for a woman in the 60s.
Right.
And she forged through and helped pave the way for many of us. I wouldn't say it's always been easy. I think that there are a lot of challenges, and there are also, I like to say, a lot of benefits. I am the only female rabbi that serves in my synagogue, and I take great pride in that role as being the only female clergy person. I also have profound respect for my male colleagues, and I think there's a very important gender balance. There are a lot of things that people can relate to me as a wife, as a mother, and as a rabbi.
Yeah.
And I value and cherish all of those different roles.
How do those kind of roles blend together? I imagine, because and we said it when we first started, you're very busy. And so how do you kind of find the balance between all of those?
Well, thankfully, from the time I was very young, I've always been very organized. And I've also been a bit stubborn.
Okay.
So the two work in my favor. It takes a lot of mental strength to be able to maneuver and navigate through a very busy day of a congregational rabbinic life. That's just how it is. It doesn't mean that everything is always the highest intensity.
Yeah.
Some days are certainly quieter, but we're pretty much always on call. And we find a way to balance and share. I'm lucky that I work with another rabbi and also a cantor, a trained singer.
Oh, okay.
So they help. It's not everything doesn't fall directly on me. I'm also very lucky that I have a very supportive and loving husband who also now works at the synagogue with me, which is pretty unique and somewhat unusual.
Yeah.
He serves in our role as director of lifelong learning.
Okay.
So his name is David, and he studied law and practiced law for 13 years.
Wow.
And gave it up 10 years ago and went back to school to get a degree in Jewish education. So he attended the same seminary at different times and received different degrees. So it was a wonderful lifestyle change when David came to work at the congregation.
Yeah.
And we are able to balance that very well. Not a lot of couples can work together.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would imagine that you guys can butt heads a lot.
But we rarely do.
Okay.
We have different interests and different skill sets. And I have a bit more longevity in the congregation. So I was already in the congregation for 10 years before David started.
I see. Okay.
So I have a different niche, if you will. And you might say that we work in the same company, but in different departments.
Okay.
So there is some overlap.
Yeah.
David isn't doing quite the same life cycle events and pastoral care that I do and I'm trained in to do.
Gotcha.
And I don't do quite as much teaching as he does, which is what he's trained to do.
I've gotcha.
Our kids, we have two kids who are 16 and 13.
Oh, okay.
Who have been a part of this since they were born.
Right.
I was a rabbi and had kids after I became a rabbi. So it was hard at the beginning. It really was difficult to balance when you have infants and they're not sleeping well or they're getting sick and you have to maneuver around that. We're great. We have wonderful community support, wonderful family support. This is their life. They know the synagogue truly as their second home.
Yeah.
They took some of their first steps in the synagogue and they're very interested in it. Our daughter is studying at HSPVA. She's a junior in vocal music, and she wants to become a cantor. So this is very, she's very excited to be a part of the behind the scenes of what being a Jewish professional is like.
Yeah.
And our son just became a bar mitzvah just as the Fiddler rehearsals were starting.
Whoa.
At the end of May. And he has very, very much a Jewish soul. I'm not sure that he will choose to become a Jewish professional,
Gotcha.
but I know that he'll always be connected into the Jewish community.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
You've talked about singing and music in this congregation. Tell me a little bit more about that, because you said a cantor, that's like an actual position that you can have.
Correct.
How does that play into the religion?
So music, as we know, especially really from Fiddler, is such an important part of our tradition and our observance.
Mm-hmm.
And so the rabbinic focus is on the text and the history and giving sermons and writing eulogies and giving charges to couple as they are getting married.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a whole broad library of what we call liturgical arts, and all of that liturgy that we read, most of it is also sung. And there's specific what we call chanting.
Okay.
It's a style of music that is not accompanied. It has a mode and it has a theme. And so the cantor is trained in that musically. Okay. So what we say often is that we call it a nusach, a melody. Okay. And that melody is very specific for the Sabbath and different during holidays throughout the year. So it's a very interesting and significant part of what we do.
Right.
Everybody loves the music.
Yeah.
And the music helps draw people in and helps them feel a deeper connection. It's very visceral. It brings them back to their childhood. Right. We know, even from hearing a song on the radio I haven't heard in 10 years, the words are still in your head sometimes.
Exactly.
And you think, how do I know this? Yeah. So the Jewish music is amplified and the cantor helps to lead us. Now, having said that, the cantor doesn't always need to be present.
I see.
I will often fill the role for our cantor quite a bit. And so I can read music and I have access to the notations and can help work with our musical director in preparing services and song when our cantor can't be there. Right. It's one person and it's a big congregation.
No, I can't. Okay.
So we can't be everywhere all the time.
But I love how intricate or how important the music aspect is to it. And so kind of shifting over into talking about Fiddler on the Roof now. Definitely. First, what was the process like when have you ever done anything like this, cultural advising? And what was it like coming into a Christian theater?
So I've not done anything like this specifically to advise on a theater production. I've served as an advisor on many different things and in many places where people often look for a Jewish perspective on something, but not quite in this role as a theater. Yeah. And so I had the opportunity to come see Steel Magnolias.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Back in the winter. And I really appreciate the size of this theater. It's intimate, it's warm, it's easy to get to. The parking's very nice.
Free parking.
And I also I really appreciate Kevin Dean's vision for the theater. Though it is a Christian company, there's also a profound emphasis, I feel, in diversity within the cast and the crew, and wanting to do things as accurately as possible while understanding that we have such a diverse community and actors are very talented in many different backgrounds and cultures. And I appreciated that in Steel Magnolias, and I really appreciate that in Fiddler too. Yeah.
So coming in, being an advisor, and it's going to sound weird to say, and I think I know the answer, but it shouldn't be like your responsibility to advise. Like maybe people should already, they should do their own research and they should know the culture. Do you ever feel that hesitance?
So it's a great question. So I was a little bit nervous when I walked into rehearsal for the first time, although I know Jonathan Kraft, the musical director, and I, of course, met Kevin Dean and had been on a couple of calls with the whole production crew. Right. And had been speaking to the costume designer about what sort of ritual clothes the men should wear and how should they be dressed. So it wasn't totally, I had a feel for the great sense of commitment to being as authentic as possible before I walked in, and to do some research myself, just to make sure that while I know the Jewish view of things, there's poetic license, of course, that's taken on stage. And so I wanted to make sure that I was going back and making sure that we were getting as close to authentic from the original Broadway show or even the movie came out. So there's been a lot of openness to having me help, and I've been able to speak up and to talk specifically to Aaron Brown, the director, and also Courtney Jones, the choreographer, about what should we do here, or what would look a little bit better here, specifically in the scene of Shabbat when they're lighting candles and celebrating Shabbat around all the different tables, and also the wedding scene.
Right.
Those have been the two where we have the most Jewish ritual. And so we've gone over, we reviewed, we practiced. I even spoke to Thomas Pryor, who's playing the rabbi, about what to do and things like that. So I actually loaned Leah Smith one of my large prayer shawls.
Oh, wow.
I said if she could use it maybe as part of the chuppah, the wedding canopy, she'd be more than welcome to, but not a requirement.
Gotcha. So you were brought onto the project fairly early, it sounds like.
Yes. I met with Kevin back in January, and I think I probably had a first meeting at the beginning of May before the rehearsal started. And then the rehearsal started just after Memorial Day. And I was there, and we were rehearsing at a different location. And then we just got to the George just last week. So
Gotcha.
I've seen the whole progression of things.
Yeah.
What's been nice is that I've been able to do some things remotely. It could be a full-time job, and I would love it to be, but I have a full-time job, so I've had to balance it a little bit. Thankfully, the summer is a quieter time at the synagogue as families are traveling and kids are out of school. And I always say it's too hot to do much of anything in Houston.
Yes, it is.
So it's a quieter, calmer time. So the timing is everything, as they say. And this timing worked out really well.
And so you got to be a part of all of those discussions prior to, the costume design.
Yes.
And now you're talking about the choreography and what's happening on stage. Did you also say, were you part of any bit with the scenic design?
Not much of it, but a little bit when it came to the wedding scene, just in terms of what we need. What's amazing in this theater is that it's a small stage, but we're making use of every inch of space that we have. It's a pretty intricate set, and there are a lot of moving pieces, literally, of making sure that we have the houses and the beds and the tables and the bar. And I don't want to give too much away, but there's a lot of that needs to take place to make sure that we get it all in and we can fit everybody.
Right.
The piece of Fiddler that's so fascinating is, of course, there's a script, but really at the heart of it, especially with the dancing and the joy, it's really meant to be a bit spontaneous. So I was talking to Courtney a little bit, the choreographer, about it's good if we can have some spontaneous movement with hands and with facial expression, so that to bring in that sense of we're happy, now we're going to dance, and now we're sad, and we have to portray that.
Right.
So it's a good balance.
Interesting. I never knew that it's very spontaneous and like trying to find the balance within a like rehearsed, produced show.
She's done a great job. She really has done a great job of a lot of circle dancing and a lot of small groups and huddled close together. So it works for a set and a stage that's not terribly big. It's meant to feel close.
Right.
It's a fictitious place, right? Anna Tefka doesn't exist, but the story is so very telling of our people. And there's a lot of, we can identify of the old country and truthfully even today. So it's nice, even though it's pretty old. Yeah. It's still very relevant. So
no, definitely. But talking on that, speaking on that topic of its relevance today, why do you think people should come see Fiddler on the Roof? What is its cultural relevance?
Well, first of all, the Jewish community really since October 7th has been coming together and coming together in support of all people. And our community needs to be present for each other. And we also need to know joy. And the story is difficult, it also is one of hope that tells us that though we may be displaced, if we are together, we can rebuild and we can rediscover and we can continue to live. And the sense of these wonderful actors, most of whom are not Jewish, only a few are, that how much they appreciate wanting to get this accurate and wanting to pronounce the Hebrew correctly and the Yiddish correctly. It's just very heartwarming. They've been also open and gracious and welcoming to me, a stranger. And that's also just wonderful representation of Houston and how we come together over the arts. And I'm deeply, deeply committed to the arts and think it is one of the most important aspects that we can offer in our life. And I know, I'm glad it's been very well advertised in all of our Jewish platforms. So in our Jewish Herald Voice, and people are wanting to come, and it's familiar. But it's also, there's always something new to discover too.
Our show is going to feel different. It's going to look different than the movie did. And while we try and do justice to what the movie did and what the original playwright and everybody had in store, it's still very, it's ours. And I think that's what makes it so wonderful. And for audiences who've never even come to theater, to come in and experience that and to have that kind of little community in that night.
Definitely.
I'm just wondering, again, kind of going back to your profession and theater, it sounds like there's a lot of similarities between the two.
Oh, definitely.
How has that been walking into this space?
Well, it's good to understand that I address people all the time, and I speak in front of large groups of people. And so I've had a lot of opportunities to speak to the cast as a whole about these different aspects of how do you want to have your hands, or how are you connecting with each other? How do you cover your eyes when you're lighting the Shabbat candles? What happens during a wedding? The one thing, and it's a challenge, but it's a sign of when Fiddler was written, and being true to Jewish tradition, is that there's a big gender divide, right?
I see.
It's very gender, right? And we all know the opening song tradition, right? The papa has the role, and the mama has a role, and the sons have a role, and the daughters have a role. And there's a lot of separation of gender. It wasn't that anyone was thought less of. It was just that was how it was.
Right.
And so helping individuals take pride in who they were and who they were representing, even though it's very gender specific.
Right.
So that's what we have to understand.
Have you had any difficulty, I mean, not just in production, but in our general culture, because that's not the world that we live in anymore,
right?
Trying to get people to understand that and see it from a different perspective? Or is that something that's actively changing as we modernize? Or
I think one of the things, and especially within the reform movement, we're very focused on being inclusive and being progressive.
I see.
So we try hard to be sensitive and to acknowledge individuals, how they want to be addressed, and what their pronoun preferences are. And obviously Fiddler is not quite a show that allows for that.
Right.
But again, it's theater. And I think when we can appreciate the overarching message, that's more important than being in the specifics of the gender divisions.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. I'm just now thinking I'd like to go into a specific instance. So you talk about the wedding scene.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like on a day-to-day basis? What kind of changes, or first off, what's the tradition behind the wedding? And what were these kind of changes that you were coming up against, or maybe these challenges you were coming up against?
So what I was explaining to the cast is that unlike weddings today where couples are engaged and could be engaged for a year plus, the weddings, as we know from the show, were pretty much arranged and pretty much expected. And we know from the show that if a daughter was getting up to be 20, she was really old. There were a lot of arranged marriages.
Right.
And it wasn't that they wanted to get the daughter out of the house. It was the duty and the role of the Jewish family is to be fruitful and multiply. And until there was a wedding, a couple couldn't have any physical contact. It's a very traditional, that still exists in many places, in many domains. They cannot have any physical contact. There's no shaking of hands, hugging. There isn't anything.
Right.
So in very traditional circles, there are still many arranged marriages. And the matchmaker, in this case, Yenta, but an actual matchmaker is often hired to help bring couples together and bring families together, because that's really what it is about. So in Fiddler, the engagement would be very fast and the wedding would be very fast. And probably everything that would be used in the wedding would be borrowed, because again, these were not well-off people. The butcher is a prosperous man, but everyone else is nothing, right? That's Tevye. That's his big role. He has nothing, and he has 5 daughters. And typically, a dowry was needed in order for a wedding to take place.
Right.
So we talked a little bit about that. I spoke, the Thomas Pryor, who's playing the rabbi, asked me, would the rabbi know the couple? And I said, definitely. This rabbi is probably also working as the butcher and the shoemaker and the tailor too. So the sense that a rabbi, that's a full-time job, is somewhat of a newer custom.
I see.
It used to be the rabbi was a learned individual who had studied in what we call a yeshiva, a traditional Jewish study hall, but then would actually have to earn a living elsewhere and would still be a rabbi on the side, if you will.
Right.
Sort of a side business. So we talked a little bit about that. We talked about there's an important ritual of veiling the bride after the groom checks to make sure that it's really the one he is intended to marry, based on some deception that happened going back to the Bible between Jacob and Rachel and Leah.
I see.
As he was coerced by Laban to work for 7 years, and then was promised one wife and then got another and had to work for another 7 years. So in honor of that tradition, we always do what we call a bedeck, a checking to make sure. And then there's something that we do called circling. It's a very traditional practice. In essence, it is that a woman is becoming into the home or domain of the groom, her husband, and that typically happens 7 times. In our circles, in my personal circles, when I officiate at weddings, often we like to give honor to that tradition while maintaining a sense of equality between genders. And so I have my couple circle. The groom will circle the bride 3 times, the bride circles the groom 3 times, and then they circle each other once. But in the show, it's very traditional.
Yeah.
There's also only 1 ring, so the groom gives the bride a ring. And the ring, if those of you who are coming to see can notice, it's placed on the index finger of the left hand, actually, the left hand. That's thought to be the vein that leads closest to the heart, just during the ceremony, and then it's changed to the ring finger.
I see.
There's also the drinking of wine from the Kiddush cup. So we talked about how to hold the Kiddush cup and what to do with the Kiddush cup.
Yeah.
And then the part that everyone knows so well is the breaking of the glass at the very end.
Right, yeah.
So that is a really nice thing. And all the while that they're getting married under what we call a chuppah or a canopy. A chuppah.
Chuppah.
Yeah,
Okay.
you got it. A canopy. And you'll see that very traditionally, instead of having bridesmaids or groomsmen, which is not a Jewish custom at all, although we have it in many modern Jewish weddings today, we have what we call chuppah bearers, individuals who are holding that chuppah.
Yeah.
And that chuppah symbolizes the home that the couple is creating. And so it has to be open on all sides with the couple in the center. So their home is about them, but it's always open to receiving guests, to receiving support, and also welcoming family and friends. So that is still used today. That's still used in that's really how you know it's a Jewish wedding.
Right.
Is you see the chuppah and then you know. So.
Are there any aspects, I mean, and you kind of hit them along the way that aren't necessarily done today? I'm just thinking now of like the breaking of the glass.
Often we have the glass is, there are a lot of reasons for why we do this. Actually, the cast was asking me too. One is that it symbolizes the destruction of the ancient temple that happened twice. The second time was in the year 70 AD. And when the temple was destroyed, it sent the Jews, they had to disperse and they had to find life elsewhere and they had to connect and find different rituals. The temple was the source of bringing animal sacrifices and bringing gifts and offerings. And without the temple, they needed to find how to use a prayer book to pray
Right.
and to use other rituals. Also, we say that the breaking of the glass tempers a bit of the joy. There's a lot of pain and hardship in the world around us. And we are not so caught up and consumed with our own joy that we forget the pain of the outside world. So in essence, it's a pledge to commit to helping to repair the world by stepping on that glass.
Right.
Today, sometimes I have two glasses that either if we have a wedding between two grooms or two brides, that they'll both want to step on the glass, or a bride and a groom. So
I see.
it's another very quintessential part of the
Right.
Jewish wedding ceremony.
I see. Okay.
And you wait for that sound, and the grooms get very nervous, or the brides, whoever is stepping on, they get very nervous to break it. And then as soon as it's broken, we shout Mazel Tov, which means good luck. And then that symbolizes that the wedding is over.
Yeah.
And that we can move on to celebrate. Celebrating is very, very important.
Yeah.
Very important. And so in the show, the joy of the wedding and the bottle dancers, it was all about how do we entertain the bride and the groom.
Right.
And it's perfect how it's set up here. The bride and groom are seated and they're all dancing in front of them. And that is just what happens.
Yeah.
It's one of the highest, there's a list of many different rituals and principles we are to follow in our tradition. And celebrating with bride and groom is on par with visiting the sick and studying Torah,
Wow.
studying our law,
Yeah.
the good book, as we say in the
Of
show.
course.
And it's very, very important. So it's that sense of joy bringing the whole community together that's just so beautifully done and timeless. Really.
Right. Yeah. Well, because and again, I've never been to a traditional Jewish wedding, but I'm just imagining, I mean, you see it in the movies and everywhere that like as soon as that glass breaks, it's just a party. It is just absolute, I don't want to say chaos, but it is that is go
Festive.
time.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, no, it is. That's wonderful. And I can't wait to see how that comes alive on stage.
Great.
In culturally advising this production, have there been any moments where something was just completely off and you needed to step up and say something? And what was that experience like if there was one?
Yes. So we had to get the sequence of things in the wedding correct.
I see. Okay.
So I watched it a couple of times and then I would speak to Aaron, who's very open and receptive. And he said, oh, yes, no problem. Let's make that change.
Okay.
And I watched it a couple of times. I just watched it again the other night and it
Right.
looked really good. And I went up on the stage and talked through things.
Yeah.
And very open, very receptive. It's a balance. This is also, it's not a real wedding, right? It's a stage portrayal and we are giving homage and giving room for personal expression, I would say, artistic license.
Right, exactly.
And also making sure that we do have the glass and the audience also, many of whom have never been to a Jewish wedding will know that, oh, yes, I know that was the Jewish wedding because this happened.
Right.
Also, there's been a lot of language and how are we want to say words in a slightly Yiddish way, which is an older dialect. It's a combination of German and Hebrew that's used. And so Tevya has been very good about enforcing the Yiddish that we're using. So he's been a good partner too, and same with Golda and also from Sarah.
I was going to say that because our Tevya, Adam Shapiro, was in the Yiddish production of Fiddler on the Roof.
Exactly.
And so I imagine, yes, he's a very good helper in that sense.
He's great.
But we've also just recently brought on a dialect coach as well. Was that something that one of the discussions that you were a part of in bringing, or is that something that had happened?
I was not directly connected with that, but we have been on some calls together.
I see. Okay.
And so it's nice to have a partner when I'm saying something that they can also nod their heads and have affirmation that this is correct. So it's nice because again, I'm a little out of my domain here.
Right.
And so I appreciate the support and knowing that ultimately what's going to work best on stage should work best on stage. And I've been happy to be a part of it and get to know some different people in Houston myself.
Right.
That's been a lot of fun too.
That's awesome. going into our kind of lightning round questions. Okay. So these are a bit of our funner questions. And first, I want to ask you, so you're not necessarily a performer, so you haven't been up on stage, but you've been in front of a congregation.
Oh, yes.
You've been in front of people.
Oh, definitely.
Has there ever been an instance in your profession where you've had a mishap on stage?
Truthfully, I have only had an issue with a microphone pack.
I see. Okay.
Nothing too terrible. We have to be really careful. We have a lot of steps leading up to our bema, our stage where we lead services. Okay. And I'm very klutzy, but I thankfully have never tripped. Yeah. Maybe stepped on the bottom of my prayer shawl a time or two, but nothing that's been too terrible.
To only have maybe you've stepped on your prayer shawl or a mic mishap is wonderful, yes. But I still imagine it's very stressful in those moments.
Very stressful. Yeah. We often are holding our big, what we call our Torah scroll that contains the first 5 books of the Bible. Yeah. And it's not heavy, but it's cumbersome, and you get a little hot, you're a little sweaty, or the lights are on you, and so it cannot be dropped. Right. It cannot. So I just if that doesn't happen, then you're good. You're good.
Then you've made it through. Okay.
You have made it. You have survived, and I'm very take pride in being able to say that in 20 years it has never happened, and God willing, it never will.
Exactly. Wonderful. So my next question, we're doing Fiddler on the Roof. It's all about tradition. Can you share with me maybe one of your favorite traditions, whether it's in the Jewish culture or something that you and your family just have a tradition of?
Oh, that's so nice. So I love being able to celebrate the holidays. One of the holidays that we take great pride in celebrating specifically as a family is our Passover celebration that comes in the spring as we celebrate our redemption from Egypt. And as our kids have gotten older, it's a very fun time in the home, and we are often surrounded by family members and friends. And what I like about it is my husband and I switch our roles. And so I take the more traditional role of working on preparing the meal with cooking, and he takes on the traditional role as the rabbi of the house of leading the service and coming up with unique readings and songs and all of the different fun aspects of retelling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Right. And it's so meaningful, and the house smells nice, and it's such a warm feeling. Yeah. One of the things that I love about being a rabbi is that I have the opportunity. I mean, I'm responsible for observing all the Jewish holidays. Right. And that's a really nice way to put a pause in a very hectic day and a year and the calendar cycle. Yeah. My final question, I mean, being Fiddler on the Roof, is there a specific song that you're looking forward to? Oh, gosh. You know, I have really enjoyed watching the Frumas era dream scene. Yeah. I just love that whole way it's being acted, the dramatic effect of it, the bed separating. I think it's all really great. I also really love the song Far From the Home I Love, when Tevye has to deal with his daughter wanting to marry outside of the faith and the pain. Yeah. And there's a lot of meaning in that. And interfaith marriage is something that we experience very regularly within our community. But we also applaud those who are willing to come into our faith and to learn about Judaism and to help build and sustain Jewish homes, viable Jewish homes. So that will be another great aspect of the show too.
So yes, at the very end, I mean, the final daughter is excommunicated from the family. How true to life is that?
It's pretty true. I mean, it would have happened. It would have really been unheard of. And that was one of the reasons why these communities stay so close to each other and so sort of enmeshed, because they didn't want any chance of that happening. Yeah. And there was a lot of outside influence, and nothing to say that he wasn't a good person. It wasn't well-intentioned, but just that it was not what Tevye envisioned for his daughter. You marrying outside of the faith was... We're a small community, and if our job and responsibility is to help replenish the world Jewish population,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't do anyone any justice
I see.
and that's one of the reasons why traditionally there would be so many kids in the family.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Tevye having 5 daughters, I mean, well, maybe there would be more,
Mm-hmm.
but that's actually a small number. Probably
Right.
be 9 or 10. Really.
My goodness, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I imagine having 5 daughters, would be very stressful for a father.
Very stressful. Very stressful. It's sort of very poetic and symbolic, right? That Tevye is this poor milkman who now has to worry about providing a dowry for 5 daughters.
Right.
And it's the sense of, I mean, it happens,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so well done
Yeah.
for so many reasons. But just he's surrounded by all these women and his
Right.
wife.
Right, exactly. And still trying, and tradition. That's
exactly.
everything. I love it. I love everything.
It's great.
Well, thank you so much for being on this episode.
Thank you so much, Miranda, for having me. I enjoyed talking to you very much.
Please come see Fiddler on the Roof. It opens June 26th through August 4th. You're not going to want to miss it. And the tickets are going fast. So be sure to come and see it and get your tickets soon. And be sure when you come in to take your photo in our lovely photo booth that is behind Rabbi Scott today. And again, thank you for listening. And thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone comes and enjoys the show as much as I have enjoyed working on preparing it for all of you.
Awesome. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye. This has been By George, an 80 Players at the George Theater podcast, hosted and produced by Miranda Zapes. Listen anywhere you listen to podcasts and follow us on Instagram at By George Theater. That's THEATRE. Sure to like, share, and subscribe. And By George, we'll see y'all next time.
Hebrew is written from right to left, not left to right like English. So sometimes when we're doing copies, we just have to make sure that it's correct. And I do a lot of proofing of Hebrew
Oh, perfect.
on a lot of official documents. So I'd be happy to take a look.
That's awesome. I did have to do, when I did the playbill for the show, Aviva put a line of Hebrew in her bio. And when I had gone and got to try and get it approved by everybody, she had pulled me aside and she said, it's actually backwards.
Right.
It needs to, and I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I've messed up and I can't. And so it took a while for me to figure out how to do it on a computer and switch it from the other way around.
Well, that's so great. I look forward to seeing it.
No, it's definitely, so it's correct in there now.
I'm so
And she
glad.
was like, I can take it out if you want. I was like, no, I want to have this
Good
in there
for
because
you.
I think it's important that
Yeah.
we have that representation.